The question reminds me of my young years in high school. You know, you have a question and 2 hours, and after 2 hours, you just pick up what you have written. I'm not sure that I will provide you a simple answer to the question that has been asked, which is what makes the society going forward. And first, I would like to maybe say a couple words on what going forward means. For the last 2 centuries, we have definitely gone forward. We have definitely gone forward to make life easier, longer, more lazy. We are lazy, you know, all animals are lazy. We all tend to try to achieve the maximum reward doing the minimum effort. Just like cats that sleep all day, and just like all animals, we're all lazy. And the 2 last centuries have been a fantastic opportunity to become very, very lazy, letting machines working for us, while we can do plenty of other things like attending this fantastic summit. Because we're lazy here. I mean, basically, we're not working. We're not manufacturing clothes. Basically, we're not growing food. We're not transporting anything. We're just sitting or talking. It's exactly the same. Basically, we're lazy. And the difficulty of what lies ahead of us is to be less lazy, which is, of course, not something that we fancy a lot. What, 15 years ago, we had a president in France, Nicolas Sarkozy, for those of you who remember him, who had a motto that was, we are going to work more to earn more. My belief is that the future that lay in front of us is more, we are going to work more to earn less. As a society, of course. Why do I say that? Because again, what fossil fuels brought us is the fantastic productivity of the industry and fantastic decrease of real prices. For example, to buy a shirt, a pair of shoes, a table, a chair. In real terms, the price has been divided by something like 30 over the course of a century and a half. This is thanks to the productivity of industry that has been brought by machines. So once you realize that, what is really going forward? Is it waiving fossil fuels and the productivity of the industry? And when I say the industry, I mean the real industry, not the finance industry, which is basically typing characters on computers. No, I mean the real industry, the one that manufactures things that you eat, that you can wear on you, etc. Well, what is going forward? Is it trying to keep what fossil fuels have brought us without fossil fuels, which in my head is not achievable. It's not something we can keep part of it. We're not going to keep all of it. Is it deliberately waiving part of it in order to get a stable environment? Is it that going forward? And actually, I believe that one of the things that are preventing us from going anywhere, but continuing the past story, is that we probably do not share the same definition of what going forward means. Probably we don't. If I did a blind test, and if I was not the one who had to work now, but you, so I gave you a sheet of paper and asked you, what is going forward according to you? And if I collected the answers after, I would probably get 200 different answers, probably. So one of the difficulties that we have is precisely trying to have a collective goal of what really it is to go forward. Let's say, for example, that if I say going forward means that people that work in the financial industry have to divide their earnings by 3. It's a way to go forward. I mean, it can be included into a way to go forward. A long time ago, when there were no fossil fuels, there was no financial industry, so consultants that I am, and finance and people that work in the finance sector that you are, actually, we are both creations of fossil fuels. Neither you, in the same amount, of course, and in the same quantity, nor consultants did exist before fossil fuels didn't exist. In the Middle Ages, there were no consultants, and not as many bankers as today. So again, the first question that I would like yourselves to ask yourself is, what does it mean to go forward? And again, the answer is not as simple as you believe, because the only answer that you are not allowed, the only one, is the world is going to look the same, just there won't be any fossil fuels anymore. That's the only answer that you are not allowed, because it's not going to happen. Never. The second thing, once I've said that, is to elaborate a little on what are opinion leaders. I will probably die not having the answer to that question. Most of you will probably think of political leaders, but actually in democracies, political leaders are partially leaders and partially followers. I mean, is Trump a leader, or is just the reflect of what the US is today? Not that obvious. I mean, when you look at long-term trends regarding countries, you realize that most of the time they do not change when you have a new political leader coming into office. And on CO2 emissions, namely, I've looked at dozens of countries for very long periods of times, and my conclusion is that what made country go to, what led countries to use less fossil fuels is basically constraints. The reason why fossil fuels decrease in Europe, or have been decreasing for the last 15 years, is because we are already experiencing an upstream bottleneck on oil, gas, and coal supply. That's why. Actually, in 2007, the fossil fuel supply of Europe suddenly went from growing to decreasing, 2007. Did something special happen regarding climate policies in 2007? No, nothing. Did something special happen in oil, gas, and coal supply? Yes, that happened. Actually, in 2008, conventional oil went through a peak in the world. Conventional oil is all oil that is not shale oil and tar sands in Canada. In 2005, the North Sea went through a peak regarding gas. And in 1980, coal went through a peak in Europe. So basically, we reacted to a constraint, and it's probably what is going to happen in the future. That's my guess. We are probably going to talk until we have a real constraint to manage. And regarding fossil fuels, it has already begun in Europe. You probably don't see it, and I probably don't see it, because basically we evolve in a world which is made of the winners of globalization. So as long as there is growth somewhere, our revenues can increase. Okay? But it's already not the case anymore regarding physical growth in Europe, and it has stopped in 2008. So what does make the society go forward? Part of my answer, or actually a large share of my answer, even though it's not something that you find pleasant to hear, is constraint. And basically what is going to push our society forward, that's my belief, is not opinion leaders, it's going to be physical constraints. If you had the time, there is a fantastic book. I have understood that fantastic is the adjective that we should use here. A fantastic book that I recommend warmly, which is by Jared Diamond, Guns, Germs, and Steel. Has anybody read that book here? Okay, 3 of you, so there's room for more. This book explains how basically physical characteristics of the land and of the geography where civilizations have thrived has modeled the evolution and the characteristics of the human populations that lived in a given place. Okay? The animals that existed, the plants that existed, the mountains that existed or not, the shores that existed, the fact that the continents were rather like this or rather like this, etc. This explains, in the very long term, of course, why, for example, civilizations emerged in Europe, in Asia, and it's basically not because of opinion leaders, it's because of physical characteristics and biological characteristics. So what is going to push the society forward is basically, in my belief, again, physical characteristics and long-term trends attached to these physical characteristics. Opinion leaders are just the foam on the surface of the sea. Okay, that's what they are. But they are not in democracies, again, that's my opinion, they are not in democracies game changers. They are marginally game changers when it's possible to change something, but again, the long-term trend is not there. We have waited already too long for humanity not to get hurt in the future because of what we have done in the past. One of the things which is a physical element that you should keep in mind is that once you have put a surplus of CO2 into the air, it takes more than 10,000 years to get rid of it after emissions stop. More than 10,000 years, okay? So the climate system that we had before the beginning of the industrial civilization will never come back. Well, I mean, if never is at least for historical times to remain. And if historical times to remain last 10,000 years, we're lucky. Given the fact that we have already lived 10,000 years of prehistoric and historical times. So one of the things also that you should keep in mind is one of the things that are going to push us forward is also constraints on the consequences of climate change. As we are animals and we trust our senses, basically we move forward at scale when we already see the consequences that we wanted to avoid. That's basically how we behave. All of you who have kids in the room, you know that you can say to your kids 50 times, do not put your fingers by the door because you are going to get hurt. Still they do it until the day they really get hurt, hopefully not too much, and then they stop doing it. Okay? Same for teenagers, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't, okay. So basically, as we're animals, we trust our senses, and it is very, very difficult to get afraid of something that has never happened. Very, very difficult. And actually, today, we do not achieve doing that. We do not. We talk about climate change, but basically, we do not change much. Some people try, or it tries, we try at Carbon 4, but the question that was asked to me is not, are there people here and there doing interesting things? The question that I was asked was, what makes the society as a whole go forward? And the society as a whole will go forward against once we have direct constraints that push us forward. That day, still, it is very important that some people are already prepared, because if that day you have a number of people that were already going in quotes, the right direction, then of course it makes life easier for the society as a whole, because you have a number of people that are not too much surprised and that know more or less or have ideas that are rather clear on what to do. But this is very important to do in order to be prepared for the big day, but it doesn't trigger the big day, which is sad. I would prefer, of course, but it's not the way things happen. So that was my final word, but after you have a cocktail, so it should be better. We should be prepared for a world which is going to be volatile, because that's one of the consequences that we will get from the fact that we do not basically do enough to prevent big shocks from coming. And if you do not want to be too surprised, the best thing to do is not to look at economic figures, because as you know, the economy doesn't make good predictions. It is to look at physical figures, which are much more predictive of what is going to happen. So again, and the opinion leaders that you might think of, be they journalists or elected people, they basically do not look at physical figures. They look at economic figures when they look at some figures. Okay, so that will be my last word. And if we have time for questions, it's fine. We are unfortunately going to be pushed forward by necessity rather than by will.
We will be taking a couple of questions, and I'm going to start with one. Listening to you, you believe that decisions and action are not driven by beliefs, bias, that there is no role for building a narratives to get people moving? Is that what you're saying?
Of course, but building a narrative is not enough. I mean, the narrative can be ill-born. If I take, for example, the 2-degree scenario of the International Energy Agency, it's a narrative that cannot happen. Okay, physically, I mean, it cannot happen. So narratives are useful when they are physically realistic, and they are nasty when they are fairy tales that just lead people to losing time. And from the outside, and you don't necessarily distinguish between the two if you're not familiar with the topic, which is one of the difficulties, of course. Yes, eventually we need narratives. What I wanted to stress is that the question is, are narratives performative? Do they change the world? Or basically, do they allow to manage the world as it is? And in the long run, they are closer to managing the world as it is than to changing the world today. I wouldn't have said that 50 years ago, because 50 years ago, we were living in a world of plenty. And basically, we could have our dreams coming true. But today, we are too close to physical limits for that to happen anymore. So some dreams here and there can become true. Maybe Elon Musk will build a base on Mars. But all the dreams for all the people and all the society, they cannot become true anymore just because they are dreams.
Fair enough.
Thank you. When we were thinking about your intervention, we had in mind the, let's say, the reverse of nuclear power. So you advocate about physical constraints, let's say big drivers, but in the very specific example of nuclear, this is public opinion shifting, misunderstanding about nuclear consequences. So this is really about representation and values that have shifted, notably thanks to leaders like you, very influential all over the media, people changing their mind on nuclear. So there might be a room for that type of belief changes.
Okay. You probably know that I love nuclear. Keep it in mind for my answer. Nuclear in Europe and in the US thrived after the first oil shock. So it was not an answer to we are going to try to have a clean environment regarding CO2 emissions. It was an answer to we do not have oil anymore. Countries that had coal basically increased coal-fired power plants. It was the case for Germany. They also started a nuclear program, but they had coal. And China has coal, and China called on nuclear on coal power plants because it's I mean, more convenient, basically. France didn't have any coal anymore, or very little. So we went on nuclear, so did Belgium, and a number of other countries that were like. The fact that nuclear has been a little reborn in the last years is basically due to Putin. When you look at polls in Europe, basically nuclear energy gained 15 to 20 percentage points of support in all European countries at the same time. It began a little before Putin, of course, but the war in Russia was, I mean, it was striking everywhere. So, and when you look at the polls in France, basically the first thing that people put forward, true or false, it's not, is nuclear is something which is domestic and cheap. So basically, when you have an issue with important gas, the opinion on nuclear goes higher. That's basically the way it evolves. Now, nuclear today in the world, it is 2% of our final energy. It is 10% of the electricity, and the electricity is about 20% of the final energy. if we have to go neutral in 30 to 40 years, it's a very good idea to keep it when you have some. It's a very good idea to build as many nuclear power plants as you can, if you can. But it's even with as many as you can, it's going to remain something which is a small fraction of what we have to do. A small fraction. And even if you pile on top of that renewable energies, it is still a small fraction. So basically, which is why I said that basically most of the energy that we use today, we have to do without, which is a reverse industrial revolution if we do that.
Any question? Yeah.
Thank you, Jean-Marc.
The next question will be for a lady, because normally I have a rule which is one lady, one man, one lady, one man.
My name is Ladislas.
Yes.
Thank you for the speech. Just one quick question. You say that the population will not react at scale until it sees the real consequences of climate change. We have seen some consequences, but if we are honest with ourselves, it did not really change our life until now. When do you expect the consequences to be big enough to drive a change? Is it in 5 years, in 10 years, in 20 years?
The day people in this room are really afraid, basically. To elaborate a little, today, still, even though I said that in the long run, what drives civilizations is basically biological and geophysical characteristics, in the shorter term, we do have people that are in charge. These people that are in charge, either in the political or in the economic sector, are basically people that are well off, urban, and protected by either their status or their money of, I would say, a number of inconveniences that are going to strike poorer people before. So the last to be afraid are going to be, including me, people in this room, which are richer than the average, or even much richer than the average, and that have a higher status than the average. And all this is a protection, or is seen as a protection. So basically, economic leaders and political leaders, in order to feel the issue with their senses, it has to touch them personally. It can happen through kids, happens sometimes. I know a notorious economic leader. I had one of his daughters at École des Mines. And the legend says, I don't know if it's true, that today, if he doesn't come to see her in an electric car, he cannot see his grandchildren. I don't know if it's true, but there is a legend saying that. It can be through losing a forest, for example. I have already seen leaders that own forests, and they have seen their forest dying, and that moves them forward. It can be in the company that they run, that people don't want to come anymore because the company is not seen as something which is virtuous enough, and that moves. So basically, they have to fear something personally in order to move forward. Otherwise, they don't move. That's my experience.
Any further question from a woman? Yes.
So you said that we should not think that because we live in a world without any fossil fuel, this is enough, and we can continue living like we do. Can you be more specific? And do you think that I know you think that we should also change the way we are. I mean, we are producing, consuming, etc. What is the level of growth you think would be compatible with? I mean, a world in which it's possible to live healthy, etc.
As we say in French, I hope you are well seated. if we want to, because of what I've said on the lifetime of CO2 in the atmosphere, once we have put CO2 in the atmosphere, which is due to physical reasons, or rather chemical reasons, carbon dioxide is an oxide, and oxides on Earth are stable molecules, which is why once you have put CO2 into the air, you cannot remove it easily. Okay. So the name of the game is to prevent an excessive amount of CO2 to go into the atmosphere. If we want to limitate the global warming to 2 degrees compared to pre-industrial times, we must decrease the world emissions by 5% per year starting tomorrow. 5% is basically what we had during the COVID. It's also what we had in 1945, the year during which the industrial fleet of Germany and Japan was erased from the earth. And it's also what we had at the maximum, during the 29 crisis, during the maximum of the 29 crisis, which was in 32. So we should have each year, if we wanted to achieve 5% per year, an event like this one. First year COVID, second year World War, third year an economic crisis of the magnitude of the 29 crisis, and then the fourth year something else, etc. If we look at figures another way, decreasing emissions by 5% per year, if we achieve, I would say, an energy efficiency of the economy improving by 1% per year, which is globally what we have today, and if we achieve an improvement of the carbon content of the energy of 1% per year, which is much over what we have right now. For the last 22 years, with the carbon content of the energy worldwide gained 4%. 4% in 22 years, not 4% per year. 4% in 22 years, which is close to zero, basically. So if you say the energy efficiency of the GDP can improve by 1% per year, and the carbon content of the energy can improve by 1% per year, you are left with a 3% per year decrease of the GDP. Okay? So the answer to your question is what growth is compatible? Probably no growth, and probably a structural recession. Which is why, for 20 minutes before, I've said that we will never do that. Unless we have constraints that force us to do so, which have already begun in Europe. Again, you don't see it in this room because you are winners of the globalization. But people in the general population in France already experience it, and it explains the structure of the vote that we have today. And it's the same thing in our neighboring countries, and it explains why they evolve similarly regarding the political situation. So you don't see it, because your bank account doesn't tell it to you. But for the population as a whole, it's already the case. There are 2 physical indicators of the economy that I've been monitoring for 15 years now, which is each year the number of square meters that we build. And this indicator has been decreasing for the last 15 years in Europe, not only in France, in Europe as a whole. And the other indicator that I'm following is the tons loaded in trucks for a given year. Because this is a physical indicator of the volume of the economy, because basically everything that you buy will be in a truck at some point, okay? Your clothes, your chairs, your furniture, whatever, everything, including for companies. So the number of tons loaded in trucks for a given year, which is statistics that you can get at Eurostat, I mean, it's no big secret, have been decreasing also for the last 15 years, slightly, but they have been decreasing. So my understanding of what is happening today in Europe is that the physical economy is already shrinking. And it's been slowly, very slowly for the time being, shrinking in the last 15 years. And again, the general population feels it, which is why they vote the way they vote. In this room, all the higher executives that we do not feel it because we are on the winning side of globalization. But again, the answer to your question is no growth.
We can take one last question if there is any. There's one.
But the good news is that growth will stop someday anyway, because we're on a finite planet.
Thank you for taking this question, despite my gender. So if you say that only physical constraints will change the way we operate, the economy operates, and no opinion leaders can change our behavior, what is the role of education?
Education has always been preparing for the future, but in a stable world, it's just like showing the past. Basically, the way we educate our kids is globally based on what we have experienced in our own life. And preparing for the unknown is something which is extremely difficult and probably impossible. You can prepare people. I mean, it is very. Education is globally a reproduction, globally, and you perfectly well know that kids they learn more by imitating you than by listening to you, globally. Still, I mean, I am for a significant fraction of my time when I'm not sleeping, doing day to day exactly the opposite of what I've been explaining before. I'm trying to change things. I'm trying to change things through my professional activity. I'm trying to change things through my associative activity. I'm trying to change things through conferences, etc. But even though I'm trying to change things, if I'm honest and look at the picture as a whole, things do not change much. I mean, CO2 emissions are at their historical maximum, etc. And when I look again at what made countries change, it is more constraints than something else, basically. So it doesn't mean that trying to change when you're an individual and that you have realized a number of things is not important. I think it is important because I think that it gets people prepared for the day where things are really going to change, and they are probably going to change at speeds that you and me do not have the slightest idea of. Okay. But I mean, I should remain modest, and people that try to change things should remain modest because, again, when you look at the way things really change, it is slow, it is very slow, and there are very good reasons for that. It's again due to the fact that we are animals, that we have habits, because in the past, habits were the key to survival. Knowing that the rabbit would always pass here was key to getting food, and knowing that after summer it was always autumn was key to growing correctly plants, etc. So basically we love habits, we love evolving in a known world, which is of course an inconvenience when you have to prepare for the unknown. But I don't see many ways to do it differently.
Thank you very much, Jean-Marc, for sharing your thoughts and playing by the exercise and trying to answer our question. Thank you very much.
Thank you.